So, friends, we are going to start a new topic today, and this relates to world population growth. In the last module, we have discussed mathematical and statistical models which are commonly used in population studies, and in this module we will deal with more of substantive issues like what is happening to population growth of the whole world. Later on in subsequent modules, we will talk about population of India and specific populations of certain subcategories. So, in this I am going to tell what is the size of world population. This is the first question any student of population studies who wants to know about world would like to ask first. What is the size of world population? What is the rate of growth at which world population is increasing? What is the history of world population growth? How did population growth increase or decrease, or what is happening to world population right now? Is there any pattern? Can we have a kind of theory in terms of which rise or fall in world population growth can be explained? This is all that we are going to do. And today, we will specifically be talking about population in ancient societies. Now, the history of world population growth and its impact for society, its impact on different dimensions of society is an important topic. This study of history of world population growth and its impact on society helps in analyzing the causes of population growth and explore the emergent population problems in the developing countries, including India. It also teaches some important lessons regarding formulation of policy. What I mean is that when we talk about population of India, we students of population in India are certainly more concerned about population of India, but history of population of India cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be placed in the context of world population growth. There are many countries in the world which have actually passed through the kind of growth we are experiencing today. Why did that growth occur in those countries in certain historical periods? What were its social correlates? What was its impact on society at large? And how was population growth in those countries controlled? Now, these are some things. If we have answers to these questions, we can also apply solutions learned from on the experience of world population growth to our own country. So, learning about world population growth will help us that way in explaining what is happening in population of India, what are its causes and what is likely to happen in the future if history of world population growth is a guide. And this also will tell us what can be done to check population growth in India, with which actually we are all concerned. The most important question of population traditionally in India has been how to control excessive rate of growth of population. And therefore, we can draw lessons from how was population growth controlled in western countries or in other less developed countries in which historical periods and related issues. Population in ancient times and Middle Ages. In this lecture, we will particularly talk about population in ancient times, and in the next lecture then we will talk about population in the Middle Ages, and then third lecture of this module will be devoted to population in contemporary world. The present population of the world is close to 6.8 billion. In 2010, we are in 2010, and the population of the world is close to 6.8 billion, and it is growing at the rate of 1.2% per year, means birth rate minus death rate expressed in percentage form per year is 1.2. So, this population of 6.8 billion is growing at the rate of 1.2%. In the very first lecture, I talked about doubling time. If a population is growing at a rate r, then its doubling time is 70 divided by r. So, if r is 1.2, every year on every 100 persons there is an increase of 1.2 persons, then it means the population will double in 60 years time. That means population of 6.8 billion in 2010 is likely to become 13.6 billion in year 2070, provided the rate of growth does not change. The rate of growth of population is, however, not a fixed quantity. For a long time, world population remained stable. In the last lecture, I mentioned that man appeared on this planet Earth about 5 lakh years ago, and for 5 lakh years ago, the world population remained more or less stable or stationary. It was only during last couple of centuries that world population started increasing. So, it is not that human population was always growing at rate 1.2%. It is an interesting history that the population of world remained stationary for a very long period of time. It was mostly in the second part of the 18th century, say 1750, that the world population started growing with an increasing rate. So, around 750 population started increasing, and not only started increasing, but the rate of growth of population also started increasing, which reached a peak sometime in the second part of the 20th century, say let us call it 1950. So, the population started growing around 1750 and started increasing at faster and faster rate, and then in the second part of the 20th century, rate of growth reached the peak, and after that rate of growth starts declining. Population is growing, rate of growth is declining, population is growing. So, the present rate of growth of population 1.2 is not the peak rate experienced by world population, it is much below the peak rate. Now, rate of growth is declining, and we can expect that the rate of growth will decline further. Since then, although the population size is growing, means since 1950, although the population size is growing, the rate of growth has been declining. The forecasts are that the rate of growth will decline further, and despite this, United Nations projections are that the world population would reach a level of 9.1 billion in 2050. So, earlier I said that if population grows at rate 1.2% per year, then in 60 years time, means by year 2070, we would become double the present size, 13.6 billion. No, much before 13.6, we will stop somewhere around say 10 billion. In 2050, world population is going to reach a level of 9.1, because the rate of growth of world population is declining. So, this module focuses on the historical rise and fall of population growth in the world and its major reasons. Ancient societies were small in size, and for them population was an asset. While the number of people in a tribal band or a community was small, the resources of nature. Okay, so, let us first look at what was the situation in ancient society. Ancient societies were small in size, and for them population was an asset. While the number of people in a tribal band or a community was small, the resources of nature were plenty. So, there was no population pressure, density of population was very small. They had rich forests, pure rivers, large species of various types of animals, mountains and oceans which formed the outside environment of human society. We do not know what the natural death rate in ancient society was, but it must have been a small death rate, though periodically death rate must have risen because of epidemics and related issues. Let us see more of it. As far as natural environment is concerned, it was pure and the density of population was very low. Therefore, many types of infectious diseases would not be prevailing. Today, when somebody discusses birth and death rates in ancient society, there is a tendency to say that in ancient society death rate must have been high because of infectious diseases. But there are many demographers who think that because of pure environment, low density of population and plentiful resources, trees, pure rivers, mountains, infectious diseases were less, malnutrition was less, and if a year is free from epidemics or natural catastrophe, then the death rate must have been small. This implies that longevity or the average time for which a newborn child could live, longevity could have been higher, and those who survived the hardships of natural life during childhood may have lived longer. Yet, due to attack by wild animals, violence between different human groups, excessive or short rainfalls, floods, famines and attack of epidemics, the long term death rate was high. So, death rate was high not because of infectious diseases, not because of malnutrition, it was high because of some other sudden and periodic reasons, wild animals, violence between different groups, wars, conflicts, or sometimes shortage of rainfalls, floods, famines and attack of epidemics. This means that even with natural fertility, means absence of birth control, the long term rate of growth of population was extremely low. So, although there was no family planning, no contraception, no government policies, perhaps no strong governments either, but because death rate fluctuated and increased from time to time, there must have been some periods in which birth and death rates were low, or birth rate was high, death rate was low, but periodically because of wars, conflicts, violence, shortage or excessive rainfall, flood, famine and epidemics, death rate increased to very high levels, and the long run tendency therefore was to remain long run tendency for the population growth was to remain at an extremely low level. Now, going by calculations, assuming that if a man and a woman appeared on this planet Earth about 5 lakh years ago, it is believed that man separated off from the animal kingdom a million years ago, and their progeny grew at an extremely low rate such as 0.0001. I sort of calculated what would happen if I assume that 2 persons appeared on this planet Earth 5 lakh years ago, and they grow at a very, very small rate of growth like 0.0001% per year, then the world population growth would have been around 10 to power 22 in such a large number which is unimaginable and unsustainable. That means, even a very low rate of growth of 0.0001 would not have been possible for lakhs of years. That means, population was stable, stationary. As I said that in normal years death rates must have been lower, but because of periodic nature of violence, wars, epidemics and floods and famines, from time to time death rates increased, and therefore, long run tendency of population was to remain at the same level. Now, is this size of 10 raised to power 22 not just unimaginable? Even today, with a population of 6.8 billion, we are nowhere near this. Actually, even a much lower growth rate as 0.00001% on sustained basis would yield an unsustainable figure for today. A rate of growth of 0.001 produces a population of 1.03 into 10 raised to power 22 in just 50,000 years. You can calculate these numbers by using that exponential formula p t equal to p 0 e raised to power r t, which I gave you in the very first lecture. Now, that means the rate of growth of population was almost 0. It was not even 0.0003 or something of that order, which I assumed in calculating figure for today. Population growth depends on 3 factors, as you know: fertility, mortality and migration. When we are discussing the world population trends, we may ignore the component of migration. This implies that in the past, when population grew at extremely slow rate, either the long term death rate was very high or the fertility could not keep pace with the mortality. Reproduction rate was only as high as death rate. The two rates may have fluctuated. When mortality rate was high, fertility rate was also high, and when mortality was less, fertility was also less, or this may have happened with a small time lag. So, in normal years, when mortality is low, fertility could have been higher, but in the following years, when mortality reverses its direction, then fertility also reverses direction. Alternatively, fertility was high and in short terms population would rise, but periodically epidemics and wars would destroy a great proportion of population and the population size would come down to initial levels. We have written records of bubonic plague in Europe. In cities, records show that when plague breaks out, then in a few days time, in a few weeks time, as much as 50% of the whole population can wipe out. So, it may have been the case that for some time, for 10 years, for 20 years or for 50 years population grew, but then because of epidemics or other natural catastrophes, pestilences, then the population comes back to original size due to high death rate. In both cases, the result is that for a long time the world population was stationary or growing at a very, very slow rate. More on causes of slow growth. We do not have exact demographic information on ancient society. There are only projections and conjectural estimates. There are mere speculations about the rate of growth and fertility and mortality. Paleo demographers, means demographers dealing with old societies, assume that ancient society had a long run tendency to remain stationary for various reasons. Hume suggested 3 reasons why ancient societies could not be more populated. 1. The ancient societies were almost in perpetual war, and the war in a small state is more devastating, more destructive than in a big state, as most inhabitants of a small state must serve in the army. War could be caused by martial spirit, love of liberty, mutual emulation and hatred for neighbor. All great saints, philosophers, religious reformers like Gautam Buddha, who lived 2500 years ago, talk about hatred and conflicts and jealousy and wars, violence, and these are actually the factors which may have produced high death rate. Not only in wartime, but even in peacetime, the condition of ancient society was unfavorable to growth. There was no law, no trial, no pardon, and the nobles, kings, rulers, landlords, masters, kshatriyas, they would butcher the opposite party at slightest provocation. This could have been another reason. There is an interesting theory when we talk about demographic transition theory. There is an idea that actually in developments in medical science have played a lesser role in long term reduction in mortality rates. A greater role has been played by rise of nation states. Rise of nation states, development of a strong political nation leading to reduced violence between different subnational groups could have been a major factor in mortality improvement. Ancient society had subsistence agriculture without support of flourishing trade, manufactures and industry as in modern society. So, that means people were constantly dependent on rainfalls or natural produce. Sometimes there are good years, sometimes there are bad years. Since there is no trade, no manufacturing, no storage facilities. So, in good years people will be happy and fertility can also rise, and in bad years death rate is high, fertility is low and there are more diseases and deaths. To quote Valenti, there is good reason to assume that on the whole mortality levels in the primeval period were very high. Many of these people would perish from hunger or disease, or after being attacked by wild animals, or after encounters with hostile tribes or natural disasters. Life was particularly hard for people inhabiting lands in the temperate or cold belts, where food shortages in winter probably took a heavy toll of lives each year. Mortality was particularly high among young children and old people, the weakest members of the groups, who must have been the first to suffer from deteriorating conditions. When finding themselves exposed to unexpected dangers, these clan or tribal groups often abandoned the old and the children to the mercy of fate. China is particularly known for child exposure, and traditional practices of infanticide. India too had infanticide, female infanticide we call. Traditional practices of infanticide as well as the killing of old people in times of hunger that have been discovered in some tribal societies such as those of Australians or the Eskimos are more likely to have been widespread in this primitive period. Most students of sociology must have seen Haralambous' book Sociology, Themes and Perspective, in which he says that in several tribes when there is a shortage of food, they will just abandon the old people, and at times they will kill infants, especially female infants, and there are also instances when they not only kill female infant, but also eat them away. So, this was ancient society. So, that to some extent explains why death rates were high. The birth rate in this age of primitive community must also have been high. This is normally what we have. When death rates are high, then for survival of human society it is natural that birth rate is also high. On average, a little in excess of the death rate. Otherwise, those primitive people would have died out and we would not be existing today. Our birth rates must have been slightly higher than the death rates. No wonder it took a long period of time for the world population to reach the first billion mark in 1820 AD. So, first billion in the history of world population was reached in 1820 AD. Bongarts argued that in the high fertility societies, birth rate too was not as high age could have been under sheer biological reproductive efficiency. To quote, typically the birth interval in a natural fertility population was 30 months, which was divided as follows: 12 months postpartum amenorrhea. Bongard is explained. First, we have seen that in ancient society population was stationary and death rate was very high, not necessarily every year, but periodically. So, there are good years and death rate is low, but then there are periods of very high death rates which bring down population size to regional or a small level. Bongard says that not only this, in ancient society even fertility was not as high as it could have been. Certainly, they did not practice family planning, but absence of family planning does not mean that they produce to their maximum capacity. Bongard has some very interesting arguments to make. You see, when we look for figure of maximum possible fertility around us, we find that the maximum fertility ever observed in any population in the world is observed for Hutterite tribe in United States, living at the border of United States and Canada, and in 1950 fertility of Hutterites was 8.9 children, means on the average one woman among Hutterites produce 8.9 children in lifetime. And this is despite the fact that Hutterites are the fastest growing tribe in the world between 1870 and 1950. That means, in only 80 years time, Hutterites increased 20-fold. This is one of the fastest growing tribe, and even there the average number of children is only 8.9. We do not have any instance of population where a higher fertility rate was observed than this. So, in entire lifetime a woman maximally produce 8.9. In India, in some writings of Gandhi was a very careful writer, and he must have observed this, read about this. Gandhi says that in India, in traditional India, average fertility was 6.1. Among Hutterites it is 8.9, in India 6.1. Maybe Gandhi was wrong and it was one child or two children more than this, but then average fertility in entire lifetime is about 8. We have some data in IIT Kanpur in collaboration with Michigan University conducted a large scale study in and around Kanpur division, Kanpur Allahabad divisions in 1972, and in rural areas average fertility in entire life was found to be around 8. So, 8 or 9 seems to be the upper limit of natural fertility even when no family planning methods were used. What are the reasons? Bongard says that the reasons are that although a woman can marry at age 15 and remain in reproductive period up to 45, that means she spends around 30 years in reproductive period, and assuming that there is a pregnancy period of 9 months, the theoretical limit to number of children, upper limit, would be around 40. That a woman, theoretically a woman can produce say 40 children in lifetime, but she produces only 8.9. What are the reasons? The reasons are that first of all, due to cultural reasons, not all women are entitled to produce children, married women produce children, and not all women between 15 and 45 are married. Bongard estimated that including unmarried women at the younger reproductive ages and widowed, divorced, separated, deserted at the older ages, you find that roughly 25% of the time of women in reproductive period is not available for reproduction. So, not all women are reproducing, 25% are not reproducing because they are not in marital unions. Then then nearly 20% time goes in sterility. There are three types of sterility: adolescent sterility, before menarche or during the early reproductive period when menstrual cycles are irregular, there is a period of adolescent sterility. Then there is secondary sterility, that women become fertile, but after a certain age different women at different ages become sterile again. And there are some women who never produce a child in reproductive period. They are called women who are primarily sterile. So, if you consider adolescent sterility, primary sterility, secondary sterility, then you can say that 20% of the remaining time, first 25% time is gone because they are not in marital union, 20% time is gone because they are sterile. Then after childbirth there is some time during which there is no chance of conception, we call it postpartum anovulatory period, during which there is no chance of conception, a woman does not release egg, and after this non evolutionary period then ovulation starts, but sometime there is fetal wastage, a woman becomes pregnant, but in 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks time there is abortion, spontaneous abortion. Then again there is some non susceptible period, and when a woman becomes pregnant then it takes about 9 months. In all, on the basis of all this, John Bongartz calculates that 12 months there is a 12 months postpartum amenorrhea, 4 months waiting time to conception before an intrauterine death, 1 month non susceptible period associated with the intrauterine death, another 4 months conception waiting time before a live birth, and finally a 9-month full term pregnancy. This all in summary. So, what he says that you see, if you look at 30 years time, 15, suppose a woman can produce a baby at 15 and can produce babies till 45, in 30 years time the breakup could be as follows. Out of 30 years, on the average 7.5 years are spent as unmarried. Either she is unmarried in the beginning, or then she becomes widow or divorced or separated or deserted. 5 years are wasted in sterility. On the average, out of 30 years, 5 years are spent as sterile period. 7.0 in postpartum anovulatory period, 4.75 years in ovulatory period, 0.5 non-susceptive intrauterine deaths, and only 5.25 in pregnancy. And because they spent 5.25 in pregnancy, so the outcome is about 7 children. So, in 15 to 45 they produce only about 7 children. In summary, the highest observed birth rates are much lower than is biologically possible, because women in natural fertility are pregnant during only about 1/6 of their reproductive years. Out of 30 years reproductive time, they are pregnant only for 5.25 years. The rest of these potential childbearing years is spent in unmarried, sterile, postpartum, anovulatory, non-susceptible or ovulatory states. As a result, birth rate rarely exceeded 50 in populations in which there is no deliberate actions to effect biological process. We do not have populations in which birth rate ever exceeded 50 per thousand population. Now, population in middle ages, it may be noted that in the beginning of our era, the world population is estimated to be around 326.5 million. Region wise breakup shows that 35 million lived in Europe, 220 in Asia, 21 in North and Central America, 19 in South America, 30 million in Africa, and 15 million in Oceania. Thus, nearly 21.8% of the world population lived in what may be called developed countries and 78.2% in the developing countries. Now, the share of developing countries is increasing, it is already about 30% and it is increasing further, because today developed countries are not growing or growing at a slow pace, while developing countries are growing faster. This was not the situation earlier. Bennett estimated that the approximate population of the world in 1000 AD was 275 and 6 zeros. In 500 years time, from AD 1000 to 1500, it grew by 171 millions only. This gives an average annual growth rate of 0.00096 and doubling time of 729 years. Look at the world population growth. So, world population in millions, today we are in billions. World population in millions in 1000 AD was 275, 1100 306. By 1500 million, by 1500 AD, the world population in millions reached only 446. And that explains why there was a lack of interest in population theory. The slow rate of population growth you find in much writings during Renaissance, or in writings of economists, philosophers, intellectuals in 17th century, 18th century. There is very little discussion of population. Even in 19th century, very few intellectuals, philosophers, economists talked about population factors explicitly. The first essay which created any sensation and which made population an issue was published first time in 1798 by Malthus, an essay on the principle of population. So, this slow that means what I have said today, that the rate of growth of population in ancient society was extremely slow. The reasons were high death rates, not necessarily every year, but periodic high death rates due to war, violence, conflicts, lack of means of transport and communication, lack of political organization, and birth rates were also low. Birth rates did not reach the maximum limits. The maximum limit, as Bongard says, that the maximum limit could be if a woman marries at 15 and remains married and productive till 45, there is 30 years time, and the theoretical upper limit of average number of children should be 40. But the maximum fertility ever observed in a tribal population was found in Hutterite population, and that was hardly 8.9 children in 1950, and this is in the population which grew at the fastest rate. Between 1870 and 1950, Hutterites grew by 20 times. So, and in India, we believe that the total fertility rate must have been between 6 and 8. Despite the fact, there are many social reasons, cultural reasons. One can a sociologist can look into social, cultural reasons why fertility was not at its peak, and the reasons were unmarried status, sterility, postpartum, anovulatory period, ovulatory period, then non-susceptible, intrauterine deaths, and only out of 30 years, 5 years were available for pregnancy. And since population was not growing at all or growing at extremely slow rate, there was no need for intellectual philosophers, economists, sociologists to talk about population growth as a serious variable in their systems. And if for the philosophers and population planners, population is more or less a constant, it cannot be part of their theory of change or progress. Economists of development would find little interest in a constant. You don't use constants in your theories. Constant in the sense that variables, if there is something which has a constant value, then you do not require to pay attention to that in building your theory. So, population was a constant kind of, only it was an exogenous variable for systems, not endogenous variable.
Sir, I have this question that I heard your lecture regarding world population growth, as we have said, and I found that you were concentrating a lot on ancient societies maybe in the first lecture, and subsequently would move on to other periods of world history. But what is my concern here is that even if number one is that this is first is a comment that I would like to make, that when we are discussing world population growth, the whole idea that there is growth in population is but a known ubiquitous fact. But what is interesting for us would be the patterns of growth with respect to geographical areas, and hence area of interest. So maybe I could have been even better, I could have highlighted something on that. But then what I'm asking is, if with even take into consideration the fact that you have discussed only ancient societies, then in ancient societies, as you very well mentioned, that it was a state of, what Hobbes says about the state of nature and all of mankind, and if it was the state of nature, and hence the propensity to which events like political warfare could impact population growth, then it has a lot to do with an era of theodicy that prevailed in that situation. So maybe a comparative study of different civilizations hence present, like Indus Valley, Greek or Babylonian, something of that sort. I think that could definitely give us some clues as to what in the ancient society were reasons for the rise of population growth in different ways in different areas. Maybe if you could reflect something on that.
Okay. So,
sir, I tried to look into the ways in which you have tried to explore the whole phenomena of world population growth, and I found that what is important for us to understand is not the fact that world population growth is but a given fact, because it is but quite ubiquitous that world population growth had to happen by default, if not by design only. Hence, I would have been much more interested to see as to what is of importance for us is the ways in which world population growth varies from one to the other area with respect to the cultural ethos of that place. And that becomes very important in our analysis up till now, that is, which has been with respect to world population growth in ancient societies. And if that is the question, then in ancient societies where there has been a predominance and a major clout of political influence, or what you said as the state of nature of man, because they were fighting beings and there was a lot of duels between them. So if that was the reason, then I think there must have been some philosophical writing, because that's how we know when we study Indian society, we find Indological writings come to our rescue a lot to understand social phenomena, because those were the only authentic accounts, though not scientific. So hence, I think if you could reflect something as to, if not in a statistical way, then what ideas do we form about world population growth with respect to ancient societies by taking into account political events through the writings of some philosophers?
okay. Aditya, you have asked a very interesting question. Actually, today my focus was on nature of growth in ancient society. I said two things. One, that perhaps man appeared on this planet Earth 5 lakh years ago. It may be 5 lakh, maybe 6 lakh. That is not so important. Around that time, and for a greater part of human history, the population of the world remained almost stationary. That it was first time in 1820 that the world population reached the first billion mark, and since population was almost stationary in all parts of the world, so it did not attract the attention of philosophers, economists, intellectuals, and others, planners or reformers. Since population is stationary, it is stationary for all. In Hindu world, in Christian world, in Islamic world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in developed countries, today's developed countries, today's less developed countries. Till the second part of 18th century, world population was stationary everywhere, and that is perhaps one reason why the issue of population growth has not been related much, actually not at all, to the kind of questions of theodicy or cultural factors you are asking. Cultural factors became an important issue only during last 50 years or so, when in certain countries death rates declined. Uh, Actually, in certain countries only birth rates declined, not in others, while death rates declined in all the countries. That means decline in death rate does not require a cultural explanation. Death rates declined universally in all the countries of the world. There still remain differences in life expectancy between different countries, developed, developing, Islamic, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist. There are differences, but those differences are not so significant as the differences in birth rate. So, the issue of culture or the role of anthropologists or role of sociologists who are particularly interested in religion, culture, civilization becomes important in explaining why in second part of 20th century some countries had high birth rate and some countries had lower birth rates. Before this, in ancient society or till 1820, I mentioned that 1820 is the date when world population reached the first billion. Since everywhere condition was similar, two new points which I was making. We will come to cultural issue when we talk about medieval society, because it is or more than medieval, during last 200 years when death rates started declining, but birth rate did not decline, or they declined in some countries, not in others. That time culture comes to play some role, but not before that. 2 points which I think 2 fresh points which I have made today, that when I was a student we were told that in ancient society birth rates were high, death rates were high, and we all believed that that death rates were extremely high, and to counter extremely high death rates, birth rates were also extremely high. What I said today is that death rates were not always high in ancient society, and in ancient society there were many good things also: pure rivers, mountains, forests, good fruits, good agriculture, highly fertile land, low density of population. So, as compared to today, ancient time was much better in dealing with infectious diseases or food production, or the problem of malnutrition. Perhaps there was no problem of malnutrition, and as such life expectancy could have been better if there were no periods of epidemics, wars, violence or natural catastrophes. This is one thing, that in normal years death rate of ancient society could have been as low as in modern times, or maybe even lower, but because of periodic nature of natural catastrophes and political violence, the long term tendency of death rate was to remain at high level. Second new point was that fertility was high, certainly high, but high does not mean the maximum or the upper limit of reproduction. No society, no ancient society ever had fertility at the upper limit of reproduction, and here we find that culture of all countries, culture in all countries, irrespective of religion, Hindu, Muslim, Christianity, all cultures played a vital role in maintaining fertility at levels much below the maximum possible levels, and that was by putting checks on marriages, or there, like in India there was a culture that at least initially, even after marriage, women will spend lot of time, years, at the parental place, and then there were religious restrictions on coital frequency. According to one estimate of United Nations, in India there were more than 100 days. There were more than 100 days when
Sir, actually your discussion reminded me of a very interesting line that we always, when we participate in all these public speaking competitions, we get this line called, "Are we happier than our grandfathers or not?" Or is this present generation better or not? So, I mean, but that's on a lighter vein. But the question, what comes to my mind at this juncture is that your last slide you mentioned something about that why economists, even if there were anyways not a lot of interest among economists, but even if they were interested, they tried to see as to how cities are grew with respect to population and with respect to variables like employment or other economic variables. So if we keep that in mind, because we also know that city is not only a very modern phenomenon. We had ancient Hellenic cities or the Greek cities, and hence it brings us, I mean, it makes us presume that the whole idea of organized habitation in cities must be giving a fillip to population growth, or it is nothing like that. Or do we have any information as to whether there were any variations of population growth in the countryside and the city, which is not necessarily technological city or a modern city in that sense, but where the administrative head was there, or whether it is a fort city or something of that sort. So is there something of, can we think that there were some patterns seen in those ways which were responsible for population growth in city and the countryside in the ancient society itself?
Okay. This is a difficult question because and I don't know whether I can give satisfactory answer to this or not. You see, there are almost no studies on relationship between urbanization and demographic transition. There are studies on demographic situation in cities, fort cities or other cities you are mentioning. In that respect also, knowledge about demographic situation of fort cities is almost non-existent. This is an area in which new researchers can venture and find very interesting facts in Indian fort cities, in western fort cities. What we know about cities is that in western countries, when urbanization started, when industrialization, urbanization, economic development they started, then at least in the initial period, while the rate of growth of urban areas was very high, that was mainly because of migration of people from countryside, because in urban areas there were more job opportunities in industries, and rural areas, due to inequality, exploitation, feudalism, slavery, people want to escape those situations and move towards urban areas. So rate of growth of urban population was high, but in those days death rates of urban areas were actually higher than death rates of rural areas. Today urban areas have lower death rates than rural areas, and that is because of better health facilities, hospitals, awareness, literacy, government facilities, more money, civil society factor. But initially in urban cities, except employment, there was nothing else. There was more poverty. This is how sociology started. You know that one reason or one factor behind shaping sociology is the study of poverty and unemployment and inequality in urban areas and industrial societies. So those cities had high rate of growth of population, not because of lower mortality, not because of lower death rate, but despite higher death rate due to migration, rural to urban migration, they had high growth rate. Today's cities have lower death rate and high growth rate, partly because they have lower death rates and partly because of migration. Some studies show that in countries like India today, there is 50% contribution to urban growth of rural to urban migration and 50% of natural increase in urban areas themselves. In earlier times, high death rate played a negative role in urban increase, and it was rural to urban migration which actually played more than 100% role in urban growth.
So that means as you are saying very properly, that the nature of city changing from one era to other has also had a change, similar change in the demographic pattern. I mean, that's basically what you're trying to put across, that the nature of the city changes because city today refers to something else, and that time it was only employment generation. It was more crude in its nature, and hence couldn't affect population growth to that extent, because today cities matter in much more. There are other variables in which this is something that what you are saying.
You are right, because all cities in all parts of the world are not of similar type with respect to socio-economic and demographic situation. Demographics of fort cities, demographic of industrial cities, demographic of pilgrimage cities, demographics of administrative towns, or demographics of capital cities, they are all different. And when it comes to urbanization, actually this study of urbanization and demographic transition is particularly difficult, because when you come to define urbanization conceptually, it's not only growth of cities. Urbanization as such is a process of population concentration. So, when population started settling down in villages, when nomads, tribals, moving bands started settling down in rural areas, we say that urbanization started. So, if you want to relate urbanization to demographic transition, then the subject will become more complex. But you are right, it would be an interesting study to see if what we call cities, there are different types of cities, they have their own functional specialization, and are there differences in demographics of different types of cities having different functional types: fort cities, pilgrimage, administrative, capital cities, industrial, or service cities. There are in context of in Indian context, we also talk of rural type of cities or urban population of different types of cities, but this is an interesting question. Maybe we need to pay attention to this fact. Thank you.